Welcome to our Jitterbit Tech Talk. My name is Jared Stone,
And I am Corey Willis.
and we are really excited, very thankful for each and every one of you taking the time out of your day. We know how busy each and every one of you are, so thanks for taking some time and coming and learning all things Jitterbit with us.
Absolutely. So, guys, we've started this Tech Talk series. This is now our third
Our third, that's
Tech
right.
Talk that we've done with you guys. Still here in the Jitterbit studios. Hope you enjoy this approach here. Just something that we want to make it a little more fun than your typical webinars out there. But we skipped last month. Now, Jared, why did we skip last month?
Well, a lot is going on here at Jitterbit, and I'm sure you've heard about it, right? Our 9.0 release. So that had us quite busy, and we honestly didn't want to interfere with that communication coming across. So that kind of segues us nice into this next little section to talk about is a discussion on Harmony 9.0. So the first thing that we want to talk about is that new Harmony landing page that you have probably already saw when you logged in at login.jitterbit.com.
Yeah, so with the new landing page, and guys, we just want to recap some of this 9.0 announcement for you. Hopefully you got to check out the webinar out there, the 9.0 launch webinar. If not, I'm sure it'll be live soon where you can check it out from the archives. But the first thing, like Jared said, that landing page, when you go out to login.jitterbit.com, you log in there, now you have the Harmony landing page where you can access all of the different apps. You can get direct to the download for the Design Studio. You can go to the Management Console. You can also go to other things like Community.
That's right.
Or Success Central or Jitterbit University. Now you can find it all linked there on that landing page. So just kind of a one-stop shop for you.
Exactly, yeah. It's perfect. It's centralized. It makes it really easy as far as the user experience goes. So we've heard a lot of great things on that so far. So yeah, that's a really cool part of it. Another great thing with the 9.0 conversation here is GDPR, right?
Absolutely. It's kind of the buzzword here recently, right?
Yeah, we've received emails, that went into play on the 25th of last month, but I'm sure we've even received some, coming in a little late, but that's where we are. We are GDPR compliant, so that's a really exciting conversation there.
Yeah, and that was some of the 9.0 changes that we pushed out just to make sure that every little bit was buttoned up for you, really protecting that privacy. But yes, absolutely GDPR compliant.
Yeah, so another thing that we have released within the Jitterbit community, if you're logged in, you have to log in to see this this feature here, but it's our Ideas portal.
Yeah, I love the Ideas portal. This is a place where you as a user, when you're out there using Jitterbit and your day-to-day, and you go, you know what, if this would be so much easier if Jitterbit could just do XYZ, whatever that is. Now you have a place, a nice concise place where you can go out, you can post that idea, you can look at other people's ideas, you can vote those up, you can vote them down, whatever you want to do there, and let us know. It's a great way to give us feedback to say, hey, these are the features that we really would like to see added. These are our ideas to make this better for our Jitterbit community. So please, if you haven't, go check that out, community.jitterbit.com, right?
Exactly.
And you can log in there. You do have to be logged in to see the Ideas portal.
That's right.
But you can log in. You can then see that Ideas portal. You can interact with it. You can post your ideas, vote the ideas, all that out there.
Exactly. So also within the Harmony landing page, like Corey was mentioning a little earlier, quick access to a lot of different applications. But the one specifically that we want to hit on is our API management app card. So
yeah,
talk a little bit about that, Corey.
Absolutely. So I know a lot of you out there, you've been using Jitterbit APIs, you love them. One of the ideas, and granted this didn't come through the Ideas portal because it's new, but one of the ideas that kept coming up in conversations was we'd love to have a way to do more like a developer portal and to be able to document our APIs. Well, with the new API manager, you can do this. Okay, it's a really great tool. It's really cool. But you can go into the API manager, a whole new design for creating APIs. You can do it the old way still too. That's still there. But a whole new user interface. It's really just kind of a new skin on it. But the new great, wonderful feature out there is that you can take those APIs that you create with Jitterbit and you can document those with the Open API documentation, also known as Swagger, formerly known as Swagger. But you can document those and you can create yourself a little developer portal. Now there's some things you have to know. You got to give them some access into the web management console. There's more to do. But yeah, It's out there, and it's a really cool way that you can get that Swagger style, that open API documentation for your APIs.
Perfect. So that's a little bit about our 9.0 release. So the next thing that we want to do is just go ahead and jump into our conversation for today's Tech Talk. Now, remember, our Tech Talks are recorded. So if for some reason maybe you have to step away, you can always come back to these. We house these over at Success Central. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but you can access Success Central at success.jitterbit.com. Okay? So our last Tech Talk, for those that remember that or maybe reviewed that over at Success Central, was best practices on environments. So best practices, that's a really hot word there that we're very interested in. So we really wanted to stay in that same mindset and talk some about best practices, but more specifically on organizing projects.
Yeah.
So the first thing we want to talk about here is just naming conventions. It sounds very simple, and hopefully a lot of us are already doing this, but it applies to those on an individual level, those that are working in a group environment, team environment, maybe even those that are inheriting Jitterbit projects. So Corey, why don't you tell us a little bit about naming conventions?
Yeah, so naming conventions, this is really where everything as far as best practices really starts. And maybe we should have done this one first before we even got into the others. But hey, late's better than never, right? So naming conventions. I mean, I'm sure there's some of you out there that you have opened up a project that somebody else designed, and you sit there and you look at it and you go, what is this even doing? Because you're looking at those operation names, you're looking at your sources and targets, and it just doesn't make sense to you because you name things one way and somebody else names it a completely different way. You're using different naming conventions. Or worse yet, maybe nobody's using a naming convention. But this all goes back to the fact that we're recommending all of our customers, all of our partners, that you define a best practices document for your organization. What are you guys going to adopt for best practices? And that's why we're going through these tech talks. They're not all going to be necessarily on best practices, but that's where we're starting at. But define out what is going to be the best practice that you adopt for things like environments. What's going to be your best practice for naming conventions? And that's what we're getting into here. So I'm going to give you some suggestions, but overall, I want to start with why. Why do we do a naming convention? And when I say convention, I mean a practice that we're going to adopt across an organization. So regardless of who builds it, you're going to name it in a similar fashion. Okay.
Exactly.
Now, this comes in even myself because there's been many, many, many times that I've gone in, I've opened up a project that I designed even 6 months ago. The time frame really doesn't matter. If my mind has moved on from it, I don't remember everything that I was doing. And so I open up a project and I look at it and I go, I know what this is supposed to accomplish, but I don't remember how I did it. But a good naming convention helps me accelerate that rediscovery process to be able to go back in and figure out what it is. And we're going to show you some examples here in a little bit of this. When we get over into the studio, we're going to take a look at some of this. But number one rule of thumb, just do it. Just do a naming convention. Come up with something. I am a fan of using very human readable is what I call it. Very human readable naming conventions. I like things like if you were doing an outline, okay, and you're going to have things in title case. That's my style. That may not be your style, and that's okay. Just adopt a consistent style. Some people like things that are more more developer centric, where you've got kind of domain expertise kind of stuff going in there. But I like things where it doesn't matter who opens up the project, that they should be able to look at that name and at a high level quickly be able to decipher what that project, what that operation is supposed to be doing. Now, this applies to the project level.
That's right.
Right? And so one of the things that comes up is, well, how do we even define what goes into a project? How do we segment those projects? Well, most of the time, this makes fairly logical sense. And what I would say is just don't overthink it. If they're related, put them in the same project. If you're doing something that's, say, a CRM to a database, and you've got several different processes going between those two systems, and they're related from a business aspect, put them in the same project. Now, sometimes you do want to segment projects out if you've got multiple people working on portions. So if we're doing that, say that CRM to database scenario, and maybe I'm working on kind of the customer side, and so I've got customers and contacts and leads and different things like that, but maybe Jared's working on more the product and sales side. We might segment those projects out for the simplicity of the fact that we're working on completely different areas, even though they're related. So we may segment those projects. But if I'm doing it all, I may put it all in one. But let those naming conventions shine. And what I mean by that is if I'm doing kind of the customer side, I might name that project something simple like customer synchronization CRM database. Okay, simple, concise, to the point. And I know that's kind of where I'm going with that. Jared might call his sales CRM database synchronization, something along those lines. It doesn't have to be complex. Just make a convention, make it to where you can understand just at a quick glimpse. Too many times I've seen stuff that's like CRM database. Okay, well, what's in that? Because we've got a lot of different processes going on. And then you might go up to your recent projects list and you've got 4 different projects that are named so similarly that you don't know what's what, and you've got to open them up. I've been guilty.
Exactly.
I'm sure a lot of us have, but it's just one of those things to try to avoid. So starting with the project segmentation and naming, and then where do we go from there?
So the next thing that we could go in and talk some about is operational level.
Yeah.
But I guess even just to hit on what you just talked about there, the key to all of this is consistency. Whatever it is, more complex names or like your preference, more simple names, but talk some about, the naming conventions of operations.
Yeah. So, within Jitterbit, we've got operations, sources, targets, transformations, a lot of different components, but ultimately everything always goes back to an operation, right?
Exactly.
So that's really, if you were only going to pick one area, okay, if you're doing a massive project, you're time restricted, you've only got one area to really keep clean in this way. Hopefully that's not the case, but if that is the case, pick operations. Let operations be your area because you can get to everything else from the operations. And let's be honest, a lot of the operations, you're not doing just a single operation. You're doing a flow. You're doing multiple operations, a multi-operation workflow, we call it in training a lot of times.
Exactly.
And so in that world, here's another thing that I like to do. And again, this is personal preference. You don't have to adopt my preference. Just pick a convention and go with it, okay? But this is something that I find extremely useful when I'm working on projects, whether I've designed them or inherited them. Numbers.
Yeah.
Numbers. It's like, okay, so I've got a multi-operation workflow. I'm going step 1 to step 2 to step 3, and you look at that flow and you see it. But when you're looking over in the operation pane inside the studio, you may not always see that unless you name them that way. So and you'll see it in the project I pull up here shortly, but I like doing things like step 1, this, step 2, this, step 3, this, and use the name essentially as a description field as well. Short, concise, not long, but just, a few words that describe what that operation is doing. But I like those numbers. Also, some other things that we're going to get into as far as folders, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So where do we go from there?
So the next thing that we could talk some about in regards to naming conventions is variables. So
variables.
Project variables, global variables, etc. So what about that?
Yeah, so years and years and years ago when I kind of got into this space, I would go into a project and I would see variables like $X. What is $X? It's used in 14,000 different locations. That's not a good best practice.
Yeah, not descriptive at all.
No, it's not descriptive. And so we could do things better. Okay, so if I'm working, the project I'm going to show you a little bit later here is going to use some Amazon Alexa components in this. And with that, if I'm doing a variable, say for the response that's going to be sent back to the Amazon Alexa API, and I'm putting that in a variable, I might call that Alexa.response. Now I can look at that and it gives me the ability where I can take all of my variables that I need that relate to Alexa and I call them all Alexa.something. And it kind of gives me that organization within my variables. Same thing with project variables. It really doesn't matter. but things that are descriptive, that you can look at that variable name, and maybe it's long. Okay, and I get that if you're used to coding and you're used to typing everything out all the time, there's some great shortcuts in the Jitterbit Studio all the time. And you can use those shortcuts to say, okay, I'm just going to start typing, and it's going to give me a list of the possible ones that I've already used and pull that in. You don't have to worry about, the fact that your variable name's long and it's going to take you a lot longer and you have to worry about typos. Just throw that out the window. Just use the more descriptive names. It's going to save you time. It's going to save you headaches, and it's going to make your coworkers like you a lot more.
Yeah, maybe around some holiday they actually bring you a gift instead of, throwing darts at a picture of you or something. I don't know. But no, that's a great conversation there on, it seems so foundational, but many times I think we lose sight of that, just going through the day-to-day depending upon our situation. But it's always great to be reminded of those simple things that make the operational level of things, the day-to-day flow quite smoothly.
It's just laying your entire project on a solid foundation. Because the fact is we're always going to have to go back to that project at some point. There's always going to be some change that has to happen. And the more you lay that solid foundation, it's just going to save you time and headache later on.
Exactly. Yeah. And before we move into our other topic, let me also mention this. If you do have questions at any time, go ahead and send those over to us, kind of be preparing those at least in your mind, because at the very end, we will do a little bit of Q&A. I failed to mention that at the beginning, but we'll definitely stick around for those questions and answer as many of those as possible. But the next thing that we want to talk about in regards to organizing our projects and whatnot is project organization.
Yeah.
Okay. So, I guess the first thing we could jump in is project segmentation. So, something like, should we put everything in a project or make something maybe more for individual projects for certain functionality, etc.?
Yeah, and so we talked about that a little bit, but that's one of the questions that I get a lot is how do I, how much should I put in a single project? The thing with Jitterbit is we're not going to limit you to the number of projects that you have. So if you need another project, just create another project. Logically, it makes sense to group projects together when you're going to be sharing endpoints, when you're sharing, maybe a database or a SFTP server connection, or more at a broad level, maybe like a CRM like Salesforce or Microsoft CRM, and you've got those using the connector functions inside of the studio. And you're going to be kind of reusing a lot of those connections. That makes sense to kind of group that together. Now, it may make sense also to segment some of that. Like I said earlier, if Jared's working on one element, I'm working on another, we may just choose to segment those a little bit more. Now, the potential drawback, because to everything there's pros and cons, right?
Exactly.
So the potential drawback there is that if a password changes and you've got that spread across 3 different projects, you've got to go update 3 different projects.
Exactly.
So that's just some stuff to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, great bits of information there. So the next thing we could talk about in regards to project organization is operation folder structure.
Yeah. So if you guys aren't aware, when you get into the Jitterbit Studio, you can organize things with folders. Hopefully you already know this, but I want to just reinforce this. And so for this, I want to actually jump over and bring the studio up on screen. I've got a project loaded here. It's a demo project that I built about a year ago now, but it's got a lot of different components in it. So this is where I thought that this could be a good one for us to look at. But if you look at the left-hand side, over here under the operations, we've got all these different folders. Okay, so in these folders, these contain the different operations that I built. So some of this is organized, some of it I actually split back out so we can see what that process looks like to do the organization. But let's just explore a little bit. So at the top, we've got this Jitterbit Connect folder. Anytime you do something like a Salesforce type of operation, it's going to automatically be dropped into here. So I've got a couple queries and an upsert. Okay, now for me personally, when I go into a project, I don't want to leave anything sitting in the Jitterbit Connect folder. I want to pull that out, put it into a more logical folder. Here I've got some, so we're going to kind of go through what does it take to do this cleanup. But let's go on down. So here's an Alexa folder, and inside that folder, I have another subfolder and a few other little operations down here. And so under Salesforce, and so essentially what I'm doing, I'm building this hierarchical folder structure. And so if you haven't seen this, it's real simple to do. You just do a right click up here on operations, and right there you see new folder. You can build these any way that you'd like. It's only going to affect the operation area here, but you can build those out. So for instance, if I continue on down, I've got some other operations down here that are related to part of this here. It's these three right here, and I believe also this one. So those four kind of come together into a scenario of an IoT pool monitor. Okay, so if I wanted to organize those, I would just come up here and say new folder, and I could just call this, looks like my caps lock's on, there we go, IoT pool monitor. Let's see if I can type it right, there we go. So I create the folder, and then I just select those operations. I can group them together and just drag them down into that folder. And so there, I now have that organized, okay? So that's kind of how it works at a high level. But what you're going to see through here also is the naming convention. Okay, very streamlined, simple to understand. I've got these numbers down through here. So if I open this one up right there, we see those three operations, and they're all numbered. Now the flow can be organized in a little better way if I want to. The default's not always great when you're doing these scripting calls like I'm doing for step 2. So I might reorganize that into the visual flow as well. For me, the visual flow isn't as critical as it is the folder structure. And a lot of people focus the other way around. They like the visual flow rather than the folder structure. But the thing is once I close out of this, if I need to go back into it, if I don't have this named properly, if I open up, say, pool monitoring, well, that's one operation. How does that interface with these others? Exactly. You know, this actually doesn't really tell me that very well. So I would have to go back and do something else with that.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's all awesome, great information there. So I guess, you know, a question that we might have, or some of us might have this question would be, what would be an easy way to find something like maybe a scheduled operation versus something maybe like API?
Yeah. So that's something that I did not put into this project, but I am a fan of. It's kind of a different approach. And again, we talk about adopting a best practice regimen here. But if you're doing operations that are triggered in various manners, some might be scheduled, some might be done through APIs, some might be manually triggered, and some you may kind of have out there, but they're not really being used right now, but you're not ready to delete them. Here's a way that you could do that. You could just go to your operations and do a whole folder. So here I would do a folder and just call this scheduled operations. Okay. Now, once I have that, I could say, okay, maybe all of my NetSuite operations here are scheduled. So I just drag that folder in there. Now, as I continue to build this, I then know if I have to go back into this operation and back into this project and find an operation that's scheduled, I've got one concise place that I can go for all of my scheduled operations. Maybe I've got some others that are triggered out via API. And so I just create another API folder. So the IoT pool monitor, that's API triggered. I just drag that in there. Okay. Now, one other thing that I neglected to go into, and I know our time's getting short. We want to get to Q&A here real quick.
For sure, yeah.
But I do want to mention this because one of the questions that I see a lot is, okay, I've inherited a project, or I built a project that I then inherited that I didn't follow the best practice. How do I go back and clean up that project? Well, I've got a little bit here, and I mentioned this in the Jitterbit Connect folder. I've got some operations. I'm not sure where they're used or what they're doing necessarily. Okay, I've got one here that's fairly clear because of the naming convention, 6.1 cleanup query tweets. So I can tell you right now, because I know the project, this is part of my cleanup routine. But if I didn't, all I'd have to do is right click on that and say, hey, let's look at view dependencies. As I do that, I can see it's called by this script launch cleanup routine. I click on that. It's called by the 1.0 launch cleanup routine operation. You can open that in the editor. And right here, I can say then locate and treat. That's in my cleanup folder. I've now found it. I can take that operation, place that where it's supposed to be. I can go on from there and say, okay, I've got two other operations, query users, upsert accounts. Where are these used? Where do they belong? Same process, right click, view dependencies. I see the operation. It's not called by anything. As I look through here, there's no schedule on it. To be honest, this is something that I built as part of a demo on the fly. this would be something that I don't need anymore in this project. So I could just go through and then delete this operation out because it's not necessary for me. I also am very apprehensive about deleting. So a lot of times what I might do instead is create a folder and call this inactive. And rather than deleting operations, I would just simply take those and drag those into the inactive folder like that. Sometimes I call it prep for delete, just different things like that. It doesn't matter. And then I just clean up this Jitterbit Connect folder.
Wow. Yeah, that's some great information there. It may sound a little, once again, foundational, but once again, it's something that if implemented properly, it's going to make your integration life a whole lot easier. So I guess the final thing that we could talk about in regards to project organization would be copying folder structures.
Yeah, so I mentioned if you were only going to pick one area, do operations. Transformations are another area that is very, very useful to have this same type of folder structure naming convention. I've done that in this project. If I scroll down, you'll see I've got some of this done. Some of it is not. And so for instance here, if I wanted to do this, I could come in here to the 6.1 cleanup and same type of thing. I could bring it over into the appropriate cleanup folder.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now the way to get these folders, you can do it manually, but that can be time intensive. If you just want to copy that same structure, you just go to operations, you right click, you say duplicate folder structure to. It's going to give you all these options out here, but I would just choose transformation. And then, okay, and that's going to copy that folder structure. Now, it doesn't move things, it just creates the folder structure. It's just a quick little way to create that same thing down here. Then you do have to go through that cleanup. And so, for instance, here, query user's response, I could do the same type of thing. Let's look at view dependencies. Let's get back to the operation, open that in the editor, find that in the tree, and I know that, okay, that's in inactive. So now I can take that query user's response and I can drag that down here into my inactive folder, which I don't have because I had just created that. But that's how we would go through that.
Perfect. Yeah. No, I really like that conversation because I think sometimes the small things are overlooked, things like the dependencies where, maybe some didn't even know about that particular option. But once again, Jitterbit and the studio more specifically has done a really good job of making it super user-friendly to go out there, find things like your dependencies, organize your projects. But really just a simple conversation there, but very foundational. And like you mentioned earlier, it's something that if you lay the groundwork at the beginning, it makes your integration life a whole lot easier in the future. So the next thing that we want to talk about really quickly here, and keep your questions coming through the chat. We'll get to that in just a moment here, but our resources rundown. Okay, so what's your next step? Okay, maybe you're a brand new Jitterbit user. Well, that might be learning some more about Jitterbit, right? So Jitterbit University would be a great option for you. But you can see on screen here that just came up, we have Success Central. What is Success Central? Well, remember, that is our documentation website where you can learn about all things Jitterbit. So that's really our recommendation to you all when a question comes up. Go out to Success Central, visit that site, and there's bound to be some information that is going to assist you with that endeavor. The next thing, like I mentioned, is Jitterbit University. If you haven't been through Jitterbit University, definitely reach out to your CSM and they'll get you an enrollment key and all the information needed to enroll in that. We have right now 3 courses available. Okay, we have a foundations course, which is a very basic course, but a great course nevertheless. The next thing we have is Jitterbit Core, dives a little deeper into some of the topics of integration. And then not too long ago, we released a more specific course, but it's in regards to custom plugins. So if that's something for you, go out there, check that out. We also have certification opportunities for foundations and core as well. So it looks great on your resume or LinkedIn profile, whatever it may be. And
now that plugin course, that one is a little bit different in that it's developer centric, correct?
Very much so. Yeah. So it is very it's definitely our most technical course, and it's for someone that has some very specific niche, I guess you could say, as far as the course material and whatnot goes. So that's not going to be for maybe your Jitterbit admin guy, but someone who is interested in maybe getting into the weeds a little more. You have to have that developer background, have some
That's mainly
knowledge,
Java, right?
and yeah, have some knowledge in regards to Java. But if that's for you, definitely go out there and check that out. There's great resources for each of those courses within Jitterbit University. So a great place to go to learn more things about Jitterbit. And then finally is the Jitterbit community, which we mentioned a little earlier. We have some great new features like the idea portal where you can go and vote on certain topics. But check that out at community.jitterbit.com. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on into Q&A. So we have some questions that have came across, and like we said, keep those coming for any of you that may have questions in regards to today's Tech Talk. So the first one I want to talk about is how to back up projects in case an environment is deleted.
Ooh,
that burns, right?
It does. Mainly because I've been there. So it's a great question. Thanks for sending that over. But yeah, if you're not aware, there is a pitfall with the multi-environment scenario, in that if an environment is deleted in the management console, you can't access the projects that were in that environment anymore because it's been deleted. When you delete the environment, it deletes all of that. So what's a fail-safe? What's a backup strategy that you can use to mitigate that risk if that were to happen? Okay, now I'm not talking about more of a recovery type of scenario. If you get into that, what I recommend, reach out to support, and they can really try to work with you on that, on a recovery strategy. But what I want to talk about more, and I think that's the spirit of the question, is how do we set up a proper backup strategy so we don't have to worry about trying to do a recovery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so with that, it goes back to jitter packs. Okay, so if we move back over to the studio real quick, we'll switch the screen over here, and I'll just show you. So for instance, this project, if I were going to prepare this for an environment deletion type of strategy, here's what I would do: is just simply go up to File, and right here I have the ability to export this project as a jitter pack. Now, as I go into this wizard, it's going to give me the ability to do this with credentials or as an environment backup. Now, you may be inclined to do an environment backup, but with environment backup, this is going to tie it to that specific environment. So if your environment's deleted, that's not going to help you.
That's exactly.
Okay. So with credentials is your best bet for this. Protect the jitter pack. Okay. That's kind of the caveat there, because you're including your credentials.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what you would do. And what I would do in that scenario is include schedules, include success and failure emails, include everything. And what this gives you the ability to do is that if that environment is deleted, you can go spin up a new environment, redeploy this. The only thing that would be affected there then is any APIs. And so that is a little deeper. You can do APKs, which are API exports. You can do that, and that will help you some. But ultimately, we're focused more on the project at this point. This is how you would do it. Just a jitter pack backup with credentials that can then be re-imported or restored, so to speak, to any environment. So if that environment is negligently deleted, that would be the way that you could get that back.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah. No, that's great information there. Another question we had come across, it said this individual had noticed that when they put a lot, and they said 10 plus operations in the same project, the project become very slow when they open the project and download it. Is that normal?
You know, it's not something that I have experienced.
Yeah, me either.
I mean, obviously the one I've got up here has many operations in it. I guess a lot of it can be depending on what you're doing, because there are back-end files that are created every time you create a project. So if you have operations, and I would imagine that transformations are probably the most load intensive. If you've got massive transformations, large mappings, that may impact with the studio loading and potentially slow that down just a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I guess that could be possible. It's not something that I have really experienced a lot of, but I'm not saying that it's not possible.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I guess for that specific individual, it'd probably be good to reach out.
Yeah, I mean, having anytime you run into something like that, that you're just like, this seems a little odd. Don't be afraid to put in a support call, and they can look at that and see, hey, is there something else going on that might be causing that? Because, like I said, that's not something that I see, in a lot of the projects I work in. But at the same time, I don't typically have ones that have really massive transformation mappings.
Exactly.
So I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but that might be part of the scenario there, because I know all of those are defined with files on the back end, have to be loaded in. So that could be a potential. Just operations, I've never seen it. So if it's something that's detrimental to you, feel free to reach out to support and let them take a look at it. See what's
Definitely
going on.
do that, and you can visit Success Central and submit the support question right there. All right, so perfect. So the next one we have, it says, are you planning to make connectors / operations that are related to systems like AWS, S3, Logstash, and so on and so forth? Something that would make the distributed microservice approach possible in Jitterbit.
So connectors, operations. We do have not connectors. We've got operations out there to many of these that you have mentioned in this question. We can, I would assume those are going to be out on Success Central, I think is where they're putting those at now.
I would definitely think so.
So you may find some out there. If you're not finding them, and these aren't going to be connectors, these are going to be sample jitter packs. Okay, connectors in Jitterbit are done with a little different purpose. We do connectors primarily for systems that are very, very challenging to integrate with through standards-based approach. Okay, I know like S3, I've done that through the standards-based approach. It's possible. It's not that big of a challenge. It depends on what you're doing. Okay, caveat of course, but we do have some sample jitter packs out there that are like, hey, here's kind of how you do it, and that can help you out a good bit. And I think those are archived on Success Central. But if you can't find it, just reach out to us, okay? And we can definitely help you locate specific examples if they exist. Sometimes they do. Sometimes we run across systems that we haven't done before, or maybe we just don't have a jitter pack that we can share, but we might be able to share some tips. So I would take those on a case-by-case, kind of reach out to us on that.
Perfect. So another one we have that came through, it says, are you going to provide some in-house queuing solutions that will give the ability to debug and replay failed operations easily?
Yeah, so that's one, honestly, I'm going to probably default over to a different conversation. Okay, and what I mean by that is I actually don't know where all the roadmap is, but that's one we can send over to product and let them follow up with you as far as if that is something on the roadmap. Generally speaking, we do have kind of a general rule of thumb that we try not to retain any customer data. And so in the past, we have kind of, shied away from that type of methodology because it requires us storing your data. And we don't really like doing that. But that is something that, like I said, we can send that over to product and let them answer that because they're the ones that would know that answer.
Perfect. So how are we testing, or excuse me, it says, how are you doing, I guess, but how are you doing testing of the operation locally only from Jitterbit? For example, testing for expected input and expected output.
So this can be a tricky one because where's that input and output coming from and going to? Okay. Within the studio, we can load in sample source data into a transformation. We can test that transformation. And we can retain that. It loads it into the studio. That's sent up to the agent for the processing, things like that. But it stops short of sending it to the final target. Because obviously, if it is test data, you don't want to do that to a production endpoint. So there's a lot of that comes into play there. You can test those transformations, though. You can load in sample source data. It is limited. You have to do small data sets for that. But you can do that. Sometimes what I will do, if I'm testing something and I want to see it more in a production type scenario, I might put a temporary target to move something over to see what it will look like once it gets there. That's a strategy that I've used oftentimes. So hopefully that helps some. And I don't know, that could be a whole nother tech talk in and of itself of how to test. So I know that's not a very deep answer, and I apologize on that, but it's something that we'll probably put that off to another tech talk and try to go a little bit deeper into testing strategies.
And that may be the case for some of these questions as we're going through, because honestly, we're not scanning through these really. We're kind of just going off the cuff here. So if it's the case to where we maybe don't even have the answer, we'll definitely try to get that answer for you and relay that information back to you. Or like in this case, we might try to do something in the future, tech talk wise, because it really deserves more attention than 30, 40 seconds, right? So the next one we have here, it says, we're using agent groups and wondering if there's a way to control which particular local agent the project should run on. In other words, they want to force a couple of projects to run on a specific agent.
Okay. So agent groups. There's not a way to say this operation runs on agent 1 and this other operation runs on agent 2. If it's in an agent group, it's in an agent group, and they're gonna distribute across there. The one thing that I do want to mention though is that if you go into the management console, I'm going to see if I can bring this up and show you, because I always like to show rather than just explain. But give me just a minute as I'm going through this. But when you're in the management console and you go to the agents page, there is a way to drain stop agents. So if you're about to enter into a maintenance window and you know, hey, I'm about to perform maintenance on agent 1, you can drain stop that to keep those operations from going there. So let's see, I'm in the management console. Let's go ahead and switch screens here. There we go. And so over in this org, for instance, I could come in here and say, hey, let's look at my agents. And I'll go into the agent group. I don't remember if it's here or on the agent screen. We'll take a look. So here's a local agent, and this one's stopped right now. But you see there, grayed out, I have the option to drain stop. So if I were in, and apologies, it looks like my screen's a little cropped there, but I think you can see what I'm getting at. If I had multiple agents that were running, I would have the ability to drain stop one particular agent. And so if you're going through, I think that was kind of the spirit of that question, is more of a maintenance aspect. If that's the case, you can drain stop that agent, let it finish its queue, and then you can do your maintenance on that one, bring it back up. And that way you're not, saying, hey, let's redirect everything over to these agents, et cetera, et cetera. But that's how we do it.
Perfect. Great answer there. So next we have a question that comes through, and it says, is there a way to check what was done on a project from another user after you load it from the cloud? Okay, I know Jitterbit tells you there are newer versions available, but how do you know what was done? Is there a log?
It's a good question. I don't know a good answer on that one. You kind of stumped me on that. Mm-hmm. I know you can get the who deployed it. I don't know if you can do a full diff on that just yet. And I say just yet because I do believe that there are some features roadmapped on that. Mm-hmm. I don't know time frame or whatnot. That's one, I'll tell you what, let's send that one over to product as well.
Sure.
And we'll get a more concise answer for you on that, because we do want to get you answers to the questions. We may not always be able to answer them all ourselves, but we can definitely facilitate that.
Of course, perfect. So another one here, it says, what do you mean by projects with API? And then it says, what is API K?
So APK, I think that's what we were talking about.
Okay, maybe that's... Yeah.
So I think I can actually, let me get my screen. Okay, so my screen went a little flaky here. No surprise, right? Happens. But if we come back over, let's see if I can pull this up here. So there we go. We're switching over to our API manager. You get in a look at the brand new API manager here. And I think I've got some APIs in this org. We'll find out here very shortly. But there we go. So we've got some APIs. And what we can do, if I go into one, and let's just take a look right here. So let's see, right down here, you have the ability to export this API. It's just a tiny little link down here, real easy to miss. But when I export this, it's going to give me an APK, an API pack, basically is what we're really talking about here. And it just takes all of those API settings and exports those. If I go back a screen, you'll see right here, I've got another little tiny link that allows me to import an API. So that's APKs. It's just a way to export and import those API definitions.
Gotcha. Okay, so next it says, can you share any plans, expectations for, or set expectations for Jitterbit adding shared repository capabilities, check in, check out, merge, etc.?
Yeah, so that's going to be another product question. Yeah. And apologies, we're more training. We can tell you more what's going on in the product today. Mm-hmm. So I know we're kind of shifting a lot of those questions off the product, but that's just not our area. Yep. But like I said, we can facilitate that. So we'll get that question over to the appropriate person and try to get you an answer.
For sure. Okay, perfect. All right, I have some operations that link together with other operations to create a process flow. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to run one of the operations rather, within the process independently?
Yes and no. And what I mean by that, and again, we're going to have to kind of go back to a screen here, but it depends on the operation. Let me find a little better flow here for that. I think I can do one in my NetSuite flow here. Well, okay, so here's a decent one. So this is a process flow that's a fairly typical process flow of success operations. So when one operation succeeds, it's going to trigger another, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I can start this at any one of these operations. So I could come down here and to say operation 3 right here from the studio. I could also do it from the management console. And I could just go in there and say, let's run this operation. So you can start it at any point in that flow. But it is going to continue on to its subsequent operations. Okay. There are some things a lot of times what I'll do is if I need to test just a single operation, I will go in and just simply remove that success operation, do a deploy, run it. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of it, but that's what I do. Mm-hmm. I guess a lot of it depends on if you're wanting to do this as kind of a one-time test or if you're needing to do this repetitively. If you're needing to do it repetitively, then there's some other approaches that I take. A lot of this is based upon a scripting call, and I don't know if I have any of these. Yeah, I do. So I'm going to warn you, okay? This is going to be pretty ugly on screen, what I'm about to open up here, and I normally don't open this one, but here is a very ugly process flow. Now, the reason this is because this is a launcher operation, this Alexa request. This comes in, and based upon what the data contains in this transformation, it decides to do different things. And so I'm using scripting to call these operations based upon different conditions. So you just see I've got a little case statement. Based upon that, I do my run operations. So it creates this scenario. My cleanup routine is very similar to this as well. That's probably actually a better one to show, but this is already up. So that's what we've got. But as we go through here, you'll see this one here triggers off. So we've got this query opportunities flow. We've got the lights flow down here. We've got this response is the success. Here's the cleanup routine. And this is the one that makes this real nasty, is because this cleanup routine is extensive. But it's calling all these different operations. And so what this does is it gives me the ability to say, okay, these operation flows might be triggered independently. So this query opportunities flow, this might be triggered independently, but it might also be triggered by Alexa requests. So ultimately what I'm getting at is scripting calls. If it's something that's going to be repetitively done, where you might call a single operation once, but then you might also call it as part of a flow, I tend to trigger it in the flow from a script. So that way you're not using success operations. I hope that makes sense. Let me see if I can actually show you, because I don't feel like it really does. So let's say here, this step 3, okay? If I wanted to trigger this step 3 independently, then what I could do is put a script in here on this operation. And I'm going to just name this temp single operation trigger. Naming conventions, right?
Exactly.
So then within here, I could say, let's do a run operation, and let's find that operation. And this would have been, I think we were on step 3. I think it's that one right there. Okay. And then I'll just remove that optional parameter. That's just whether it's ran synchronously or asynchronously. I want it to run synchronously. That is the default. Okay. And now you see the little blue line pointing down here instead of the success operation. And so then I could come in and say on success operation, remove. Well, let's see. There we go. That gets it. Now I have to deal with the success. So I just go back into that script and I'll run my step 4 here from that same script. So here we go, NetSuite, step 4. And again, remove the optional parameter. There we go. Save that. And now what ends up happening is I have that scripting call. You know, somewhere in there it should be. Invalid. So I did something incorrectly here. Let's just redo that. Run operation. I had some typo and figured I'd just redo it rather than figure out what the typo was. So there we go. Now we're valid. Now we see that blue line. And I can remove the success operation right there. And now what that does is it creates this script trigger that's using as my launcher. And that way, if I run the process, it's going to run every operation in the process. But I can also run step 3 independently. It's not going to run step 4. I can run step 4 independently, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that makes sense. So again, if it's a single, I might just remove the success operation temporarily, run it for the test, kind of go back in. Again, we're getting into testing methodologies here. Mm-hmm. But if it is something more of a design methodology where I need to call an operation as part of a flow, but I also need to call it independently, and I don't want to copy that operation, this would be more the way to do it, is to use a script to launch those rather than the success operations.
Perfect. Yeah.
So
perfect.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, and also we want to go ahead and tell you all that we allotted 45 minutes for this call. So if you do have to leave, we want to respect your time. No worries there. We're going to continue on answering these questions, and you can, if you have another call, a meeting that's coming up, you can check this out over at Success Central. This kind of leads into one of the next questions that came across. It says, where can I find the recordings? Are these available? Or where are these available, rather? So you can check these out over at Success Central. So that's success.jitterbit.com. This video will probably be up in the next couple of days or so, but our prior Tech Talks, you can go check those out over there, okay? They're also, I believe, available on YouTube if you want to go check those out on YouTube, all right? So the next question, next couple of questions here is in regards to calling next operation. So it says, can you do this from within a script versus using success or error options?
Well, we just kind of showed some of that, and that may have been actually piggybacking on, because we don't always see when the questions come in, so that may have been piggybacking on what we were talking about. But yeah, you get to see it there. You can call operations from script, use run operation. Another one in there, because I think there was another question that came in about, and I saw this, my questions disappeared off my screen, yay. But I think there was one that came in about duplicating folder structures to another project.
We talked about that a little bit.
That one's a little challenging, but as far as other projects, you can do a run operation from project, and that's a really cool feature. But yeah, just run operation, that's the main function that you're going to be using when you're doing it from script. Since I mentioned the question, I guess I'll go ahead and jump to it. If you want to duplicate folder structures over to another project, that feature isn't really there. One thing that you could do, if it's something that's going to be repetitive, you could kind of create a project with the folder structure, make copies of that, and then populate that. But yeah, there's not really a way to go from project to project once it's out there.
All right. So another question comes across in regards to the training modules. So how do you access that information? So I'm assuming they're talking about Jitterbit University. So you can access Jitterbit University at university.jitterbit.com. Now, you have to have an enrollment key to sign up and start your training. You can get that information from your customer success or partner success individual. So reach out to them. They'll get you the enrollment key along with registration information, and you can go out there and start learning about Jitterbit. Okay.
Now, how much does that cost, Jared?
Zero.
Zero. Can you believe that?
So yeah, how many times is training for free? Not too often. It's typically wrapped in there somewhere. But in our case, we find value in giving that to everyone for free. So it's a really nice gesture, I think. So another question, it says, and this may be outside of the scope of our understanding due to the question here, but it says, are there any plans of adding joins and groups by it says for aggregation in the studio?
So there are ways we can do that today, actually. But again, for roadmap questions, we'll send out the product.
Exactly.
As far as plans going forward and simpler features. But there are ways that we can do that today. And I think I actually have a Jitter pack on a way that we can accomplish that. And I can send that over to you. Just an example, the one I built was using, I tried to make it as complex as possible from a processing standpoint. So I actually did it across 3 CSV files because CSV files are a pain to join. And joined those 3 different data sets across 3 different CSV files, processed that, did a lot of cool stuff with it. So I'll send you a Jitter pack on how to accomplish that.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect.
But it could be 3 CSV files. It could be a CSV file, a database query, and a NetSuite query. It doesn't really matter where the data is coming from. The method works across the board. But one other way that we do have in there today that can accomplish that also is XSLT. It's not something I typically recommend because you really have to have deep understanding of XSLT. If you do, the feature's there, you can use it. Personally, I prefer this other approach that I'll send you a Jitter pack on.
Perfect. Yeah. So the next question here says, can you lock a project for multiple users editing at the same time?
I don't really know of an effective way to do that other than just your environment permissions.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about this. I think we did, but if we didn't, we'll do another tech talk on it at some point.
Yeah. But
as far as kind of a multi-user scenario,
mm-hmm.
And there's some things you can do, but as far as locking the project, the only way that I've seen that effective, and this was way, way, way back before we went to Harmony, so honestly, it probably isn't going to be as effective now anyway. But that's using like a shared drive to access the files, and that would lock it. Again, this was years ago, like 5, 6, 7 years ago that we were going that approach. But it was really relying more on a file system lock. With Harmony and the ability that we've built in for multiple users explicitly to be able to do that, it's just kind of a different approach. But hey, something great to put on the ideas portal.
Definitely is the case. So let's move on to the next one here. It says, what are the best practices for building projects to keep process run times minimal?
Ooh, that's a deep question. We're really talking about project optimization. I'll hit a few high-level things. Again, this is something we can put on the Tech Talk list, and because we can do a whole Tech Talk on this and then some. But as far as project optimization and keeping run times minimal, the number one thing that I've encountered, filter your data sets as early in the process as you can. What I mean by that, I've seen people go out and design projects and they'll hit an API or a database or something like that, and they pull in a massive data set, and then they rely on Jitterbit to then filter that data set down. When they could have put in a where clause in their select or something in their REST query to pull back just the records that they needed to work with. And so they may have been able to pull back 1,000 records rather than 10,000 records. Now, I mean, I'm not saying you can't filter in Jitterbit, but obviously if you're pulling more data in, it's going to take longer to process that data. And so overall, the earlier you can filter data, the smaller that data set's going to be, the quicker your runtimes are going to be. Now, that's just one element. There's a lot more that could go into that discussion as far as optimization of runtime. And again, that's something we can add to a future tech talk and talk about some of those other strategies. But that is kind of the number one thing I would say that I've encountered, at least, is the earlier you filter your data, then the smaller data sets you're going to be working with as far as those runtimes.
Perfect. Yeah. So next question here says, what is the best practice in Jitterbit for error alerting? Are you still recommending emails as a best practice?
So that's what's built in, yes. But a lot of it is really going to be, what do you need as far as a best practice? Yeah. Now, here's what I mean by that. Email is what's built in. That's always, for me, that's always going to be kind of the fail-safe, so to speak. But we do have customers that are using other tools. We have customers that are using Slack. And essentially, they use Slack as another endpoint in their integration to send a Slack notification when there's an error. You can do that. Okay, there's a lot of different ways. What's built in is email. And again, typically, I always look at email as kind of that fail-safe type scenario, because if your integration with Slack breaks, then you just lost your error notifications, and that's not good. Mm-hmm. So at minimum, if your errors are coming down into something like Slack, then set up email notification if that were to fail. Does that make sense? I hope so. But the general recommendation, email is there. It's rock solid. Well, unless your SMTP server goes down. Yep. But hopefully then it's sitting in a queue. But yeah, there's other approaches too. It's really based upon more, what do you use and what would be ideal for your organization to use for error handling.
Perfect. Yeah. No.
We also had a tech talk on that.
We did. That was our very first tech talk. So you can go check that out over at Success Central when you do have some time. But we have another submission here. It says, good talk, great job. So we appreciate that.
Hey, thanks.
We definitely appreciate that, with some smiley faces. That makes us smile as well. But in regards to that, and in the spirit of the question, let us know how we're doing. You can also talk with your partner or customer representative and kind of give us some ideas as to future tech talks. We've already talked about that some here with some of the questions that have come across, what to do next, because there's lots of good information out there, and we love to hear what you think, that you want to hear about. So
yeah, be expecting another tech talk early July.
Definitely.
Date's not locked in yet, as far as I know, but it will be soon.
Yeah, and you'll hear from your Jitterbit representative on when that next one will be and all that good stuff. So, all right, but thanks for that feedback there. Is there a way to search for all the projects that you are using a particular source or mapping without having to open each project individually and looking into it?
Across projects, not really. Mm-hmm. And that's where I was saying, best practice as far as within projects, to kind of group those for the ones that are sharing those sources and targets, endpoints, things like that. I'm trying to think, technically, if you want to get into the weeds, okay, this is tech talk, right? We're going to talk tech. So if you want to get into the weeds, every project has XML definitions on the back end. For instance, if we switch screen here, on this particular project that I've been on, I can go up to this project and let's see where it's at now. There it is, properties. And in properties, I see on my file system where this particular project resides. On the back end, if I open up this project and I go into it in the folder structure, there are going to be XML definitions on the back end for all of these different components. So if you wanted to get into, say, a grep tool, you could grep through multiple files and search for some string. So that could be one mechanism that you use. Some things are encrypted in there, so you may not be able to get everything in a text string, but that's about the only way really that you could search across multiple ones. And again, it's not something that's built into the tool, but hey, it's a tech talk. We're going to talk tech, right?
Exactly. All right. All right, so let's see here. We have another one that says, how do I convert a date time field that comes from a CSV, and it's sometimes 12 hours and sometimes 24 hours, to an output CSV in Target? Just need the function and the transformation.
Gotcha. So yeah, let's jump back to, I know we just jumped over, but let's jump back to the studio here, and I'll just go into a quick little script editor, and the functions are all going to be right here under date time. Okay, so within date time, you've got things like CVT date, and let's see, what was there's another one here as well. Where did it go? Format date. Those are the two functions, CVT date, format date. The difference between these is that format date works with a date data type. Okay, so your date, your data type coming in from the CSV, if it's marked in your field structure as a date data type, this one worked just fine. Otherwise, you would go to CVT date. And if you look at the little documentation here on CVT date, this is where you can set in things like your 24-hour or 12-hour time. When you're doing your time reference here, hour, minute, AP sets that as 12-hour time. If you leave that off, it'll default to 24-hour time. But it allows you to define what the expected input format is, and then define what you want as the output format. So that's the function that you would typically use. Again, if it's already a data type, then you can simplify it and simply use format date. The only thing that you don't have to do with that you do with the others, you don't have to define that input format.
Okay.
But that's the function you would use.
Perfect. Yeah. So another one that came across, it says, is there a best practice for logging operation success and failure to a SQL log table?
To a SQL log table, scripts is really the way that we would do that. A logical error handling operation. I think we touched on that at least in the first Tech Talk. I know we didn't go deep on that particular methodology, but if on your operation you simply create a failure operation, so on failure, run another operation in there, just have a little script that captures the data that you need and do a SQL insert. Basically, it would be a DB execute function in the script, DB execute, and then what your insert statement would be, and that would allow you to put that in. And of course, you can capture those errors. You got errors, variables out there like jitterbit.operation.error, jitterbit.operation.last_error, where you can get those error messages coming back from the operation and use that to then write that into the SQL database. So that would be the way to do that within Jitterbit.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, perfect. That actually covers all of our questions. So we definitely appreciate everyone sticking around, submitting those questions and whatnot. But that concludes our Tech Talk for this month. So like Corey mentioned a little earlier, be on the lookout in the coming weeks from an email from your representative, whomever that may be, in regards to our next Tech Talk. And we'll have some information on that topic as well. But just to revamp, this Tech Talk will be available at Success Central within the next couple of days or so. And you'll have that information from your representative, I'm sure, as well. Okay. So, Corey, thanks again for joining us. All right. And we do appreciate it. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day. And until then, we'll see you next time.
Have a great one.